Today is Thursday, February 5th in the year 2015. I am Susan Meehan, and I'm talking today with Fred Harle, an architect and a lifelong resident of Cumberland County. We are in the recording studio of the Cumberland County Historical Society. And as I explained earlier, we could talk only about your architectural life, but we also would like to have your reminiscences of being in Cumberland County. And so I will start by asking you, how did you come to Cumberland County?
Well, at the Second World War, my parents moved in to Camp Hill because of the war and numerous other reasons. But I basically came here in, 1942, 41, 42.
So was this before you were in school, or you had...
Just the beginnings of school.
Mm-hmm.
I attended, I don't know if you're familiar with the Fredrick Library.
Yes.
In Camp Hill. Well, there used to be an elementary school called the Lincoln School. That is where I went through my first 6 years of schooling.
And did you have brothers and sisters who were in the
Yes,
school
there's
with you
5
too?
of us, 5 children.
Oh, wow. Busy,
3 girls and 2 boys.
busy household.
Yes.
And had your parents, what state had they been in before? Pennsylvania, in a different area?
We were
or-
always in Pennsylvania. Born and raised in Pennsylvania. We lived up in Stony Valley behind Dauphin on a farm until the war started.
Where that beautiful rail trail
Yes,
in that area?
well, I used to fish that rail trail before when they had a pump cart that used to take us up to what they called Rattling Run above Ellendale Forge, and my brother and I used to go fishing with the railroaders that would come by every morning and back with one of the pump carts that took us fishing at that time.
That's wonderful.
It was another world, totally
Another
different
time,
world. Yes,
another
it
world.
was.
Yeah. And have you enjoyed being outdoors your whole life and enjoyed the Appalachian Trail and these things, or not
Yes,
so much?
we have a group that we've been together for 15, 20 years that we do a lot of canoeing and a lot of hiking. We've been on the Appalachian Trail. Unfortunately, I've never traveled from one end to the other. I don't think anyone in the group has, but we've traveled a lot of the sections of it, of the Appalachian Trail. And we've canoed a lot of the rivers and streams, well, not only in Pennsylvania, but in New York State as well. So we do enjoy a lot of outdoor camping and things that people seem to stay away from now. I mean, we spend time in tents and canoes, and it's been a very enriching life for us.
I think Pennsylvania offers a lot in that regard.
Yes.
And did you do camping as a child in this area anywhere? Or?
Yes, in Camp Hill, Washington Heights, Holy Spirit Hospital, that was all woods. We camped there in the 1940s.
But with Boy Scouts or just in...
Friends. Was usually friends. We were in Scouts as well, but we did more camping just with friends.
So you didn't need to do the YMCA camps or...
No. Camp Shikellamy, I've been there on a number of occasions, but it wasn't a regular thing. My parents never sent us off to summer camp.
Can you skin a rabbit?
Yes.
And were you involved in hunting also?
Yes, I was until I was 18, and then I shot my last deer at 18, and when it cried like a child, I thought, I can't do this anymore, and we've abandoned it. My family was a hunting family, very much so.
Well, that's certainly a long tradition and a current tradition, I think, for a lot of Pennsylvania.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Still is.
Exactly. So to get back now to your school, then you went to, did you go to high school in Camp Hill too?
Yes.
Or did you?
Actually, when I was in Lincoln School, I was very fortunate. There was a residence across the street from the Lincoln School that was built in 1936 by Jim Minnick. who was a local Camp Hill architect. And when I was 12 years old, I realized what I wanted to do. I thought if someone can do this kind of work, I think there's something out there worthwhile. And it's really, ever since I've been 12, I've been pursuing it. So as I said, I've been very fortunate.
So how did this manifest? Did you like drawing?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The family, my brother is a wonderful painter. He fly fishes and paints in Montana. And so it is a genetic thing, I'm sure, because 3 of the 5 people can draw and have pursued it. 2 of us have out of the 5.
So this Mr. Minnick, that was sort of your early teacher or mentor?
He was a mentor to me. He was deceased when I saw his work. Unfortunately, he was killed in an automobile accident in Camp Hill on the old bypass when he was, I think, 42 years old.
Oh, dear.
And he was far ahead of his time.
Was did he have some buildings that were built in this area, though? That
Yes. Are you familiar with the Camp Hill Park football field and park?
Yes.
2 houses from the entrance to the park, there's a white flat roof, very contemporary home, which was his personal residence. The Masonic home at 23rd and Market in Camp Hill. It's a little international style stucco limestone box that's been there since the 1930s. Most of his work was done in the 30s. The house across from Lincoln School was done in 1936, I think.
So where was he trained? In Pennsylvania?
He
or
was
somewhere
Carnegie
else?
Mellon.
Oh.
From what my recollection or my knowledge of him, he was at Carnegie Mellon.
Well, we need to maybe explore a little bit more about him and his buildings too.
Mm-hmm.
So was it because of him that you became interested in a more modern aesthetic? Or?
Yes, definitely. And I came back here thinking that there was a crying need for it. It's been a rough road to hoe
It's
in central Pennsylvania.
such an area of traditional buildings.
Yes,
and
it is.
Antique aesthetic. And,
Which I've been very much influenced by the farmhouses. I mean, Pennsylvania farmhouses are some of the most wonderful buildings, but what people do to them sometimes is unfortunate. And the Shakers, I've always had great respect for the Shakers. I think one of the things that has stuck with me for many years is the fact that the Shakers knew when to stop. And it's evident in if you see their work and the effort at Cloisters and many other. A lot of it was in Ohio, but the Shakers really had a restraint that I've had great respect for.
well, I can see that when I looked through the buildings that you have on your website, videoed there, and sort of tried to understand your aesthetic, and it seemed to me it was like a distillation of the traditional building blocks, but used in a spare way. I don't know, how would you describe?
That's close enough.
Well, it's just astonishing to me that they fit the site and they speak to the materials that you're using.
Well, I'm glad you looked at the internet or the website. A lot of times people will call us and they know nothing about our work, and unfortunately this, I think, is due to the lack of the architectural profession to educate and to the schools. I mean, they take the music, the art, the architecture out of schools now, and it's unfortunate to me because it's the most enriching aspects of our culture, and it's a reflection of it. And but I really enjoy working in this area. in 50 years, we've done over 500 projects. So,
Wow.
I mean, it's a lot of them are hidden. Most people don't see them. But it's been an interesting experience. And the fact that there is a great variety in what we do is because of our clientele. When we first came here, I don't know, to express a personal note, when we did a home for Bill Kramer,
Okay.
and that's how we met Ann.
I see.
And
Oh,
after
it
we
didn't.
did the home for Bill, Bill wanted a very contemporary home. It's up in White Rock Acres. And Ann, of course, being as active as she's been with the Historical Society, she lived in a house here, a very traditional house in Carlisle. But after Bill, during construction, she did spend some time on it, and about 3 months or 4 months after, I think, Bill had moved in, I got a telephone call, and Ann indicated that it was the most difficult call for her to make. And she said, I would like to have you do a home for us, but we don't want any circles, no sliding glass doors, and no Sunday drivers. So it was a very good experience. And have you seen her home?
Yes, I have. It's lovely.
Well, it looks like a ranch house if you want to get down to basics. But Ann and George were very good clients, and so was Bill. And I remember shortly after people realized that we were doing a home for Ann, there were comments made about, why would you go to someone like Mr. Harle or Fred Harle? He doesn't do what you want, he does what he wants. And it took 20 years and a great variety of buildings to convince people that we really do work with our clientele and spend a lot of time with them, a lot more time than I think people realize you might want to spend or should spend or expect you to spend with them. But it was a wonderful experience, and I think now people realize that we've actually, I hope, responded to George and Ann's needs and requirements.
It seems to fit very nicely where it sits and lives well.
And I don't think Sunday drivers spend too much time
They have trouble finding
slowing down. But we had another one. I don't know if you're familiar with a black glass building over near the Harrisburg Academy. It was for cardiovascular surgeons. It's in our website. It's all black glass, no mullions, and it's very stark in the mines. And I remember, again, we were still in a position to receive commentary regarding how could anyone put that upon some poor client. And this particular client came to us with a photograph of a building in Austin, Texas that had 52 stories high, but it was a black glass building and there were no mullions on it. And when it was finished, it was referred to as the Darth Vader helmet. But all I ask people to do is, if you drive by it every hour of the day, with the sunrise, the sunsets, the clouds, it is, to me, one of the most exciting buildings. And we really did exactly what the client wanted us to do, but there were many people out there just couldn't thought how we could put this on the shoulders of a client in this central Pennsylvania area. But we've had a wonderful 50 years. This is our 50th year of practice.
Oh, that's very exciting. And do you work out of state too, or not so much?
Yes, we've worked in 13 different states. I mean, we've done a lot of work in the East Coast and some in Colorado and some in the West Coast and Seattle area. But it's usually word of mouth from friends who are moving. Now some have moved to the skiing areas, and we've done work in Colorado and Utah. But
so is the bulk of your work in residential or commercial, or what's your?
It started out as probably half residential initially, and it's more commercial. But now we're going back to residential. No one's building commercial buildings. The doctors we did must have done 150 doctors' medical offices over the years, and now there's too many buildings available at $10 a square foot instead of $25. So there's very little construction in the medical profession and commercial work, but we're now probably 50-50, commercial and residential combination.
Well, I very much admire the beautiful all glass buildings, and so I must look at that more closely. What do you do as an individual to keep current with the new materials and all the things that you have to know about the materials that you use?
Well, it's a growing, gradual thing. I think from the time you start in the profession, there's always new things coming out, and with the internet and computers, the sources are unimaginable as far as materials are concerned.
So is Architectural Digest still published and things like
Yes,
that, or is that?
It is.
That's
but
for a layman more, I guess.
Well, it is, but it's not an inspiration to us. We do get it periodically. Mm-hmm. But these are people that build $50, $60 million houses. Unfortunately, it conveys I think it indicates to many people that this is what architecture is all about, and it's not. I mean, I'd like to show you. I wanted to show you some of the things we've done.
Do.
One of the first.
You can do that and show it to the camera so that we know what.
Some of the first houses that we did in our own particular house, we built for $25,000 in 1965, and a lot of sweat collateral. But and we've done 2 or 3 at the same time, $40,000, $50,000 homes. I mean, we had very well-educated clients who understood the limits. I mean, most people will come to you and they tell you they'd like to do a house, and they give you a program and tell you they want to spend $150,000 and it should be $300,000 budget. And those 3 items, the size, the quality of the materials, and the budget are something that you deal with on a regular basis. But I wish that people were better educated with regard to the fact that architectural fees are recovered if you really sit down and spend the time. But it's very hard to verbalize to a client and tell them that, well, we can save our fee, and the fee seems excessive to many people. We're still fighting to get a 6% fee, and there were 6% fees when Frank Lloyd Wright was practicing. And another unfortunate thing, when I mentioned if people ask, what do you do? And when you mention that you're an architect, invariably people say, well, I know Frank Lloyd Wright, and I wish it were more than Frank Lloyd Wright. Mm-hmm. He probably was one of the greatest architects ever. But, and I'd like to think that a lot of our things, the spatial qualities that he used, we've been strongly influenced by. There's no question about it. And but again, it's a matter of not really having a good background available or a good educational system available for the general public. And I've felt very disappointed in the profession and in the fact that people really don't understand the enriching values of what architecture is all about.
Well, to get to a different aspect of your architectural work, well, maybe you don't know that we have been working on this 5-year project to document the water-powered mills in Cumberland County. And the book will be published be out in March. So there we have the influence of the builders from Scotland and Germany coming and putting in these mills. And I know that you were involved in the library renovation in Mechanicsburg, yes, from one of the mill owners' warehouse.
Yes.
So I'd like to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Well, it was the Kohler Mill. Mm-hmm. Linda Humes. I don't know if you know Linda Humes.
Yes.
That's her family originally built that in 1860. Mm-hmm. just prior to the Civil War. But that was it also depends a lot on the clientele. That was a group of one of the best clients that we've ever worked with. I guess the building chairman, Foster Berkheimer, was very understanding of the construction industry. And Sue Erdman, I don't know if you know Sue, she's the executive director. She was, I think, here at the Bosler Library and came with them. I don't know, there are things that I don't know if I should be revealing. Can we edit this? The original director of the library, we started the first month or two when we were asked to pursue and look at a number of buildings and give some recommendations. And when we sold the grain, it was a craft shop. I don't know if you remember
yes, I do.
that. And it was basically put upon in inappropriate ways, I think. And the director didn't really see the potential. The basement, I don't know if you're aware, the basement of that building, you could touch the ceilings. We cut the entire basement out from under that building and added 3.5 feet of height to it to put the children in it. And when you think about this very, very large stone building that somebody went down and took all the columns out, put new columns in it, it was a very good contractor. McCoy Brothers did the original work, and Miller Norford, I guess, did phase 2, the reading loft up in the upper floor and the second floor. But the original director just was much distressed by it, and I think she resigned because of it. Mm-hmm. And when Sue Erdman came, Sue Erdman is one of the most wonderful, organized, sensitive, understanding people that I've ever worked with. But from there, it was a very good project, and I think I was concerned when we put the 2 stairwells on the existing building. Mechanicsburg's very much like Carlisle in the tradition and save and salvage and restore. But I'd like to think that the stair towers were compatible, and I didn't really want to take that space out of the existing building. And if you were in the crafts center when it was there, it looked like they took a chainsaw and cut a rectangle out of the structure and put a stairwell that was unusable. We restored it back to the original structure and basically took all the ceiling tile out and the wallpaper and the 1/4-inch plywood paneling off, and we sandblasted the entire building on the interior. And again, it was a very successful, I think, and very enriching experience for us. And it's good to have clients like that.
What is your feeling about preservation in general?
Well, if it's worth preserving, I think it should be. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could go back here to the State Theater in Harrisburg. I don't know if you ever knew anything of it. It was unfortunate, but there's a metal building there that I think is most inappropriate. But they tore a lot of buildings down in the Harrisburg area that should not have been. And then other times the preservationists will really go out of their way to try to salvage something that is not worth salvaging. I don't know if there was a women's school on State Street right down below the Capitol steps. There's
I didn't know about that.
Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association
Okay.
building there. We did the original building, and there was a Masonic home, or elk rather, or moose, I guess it was. Mm-hmm. I'll get around to it, but there was a moose there for many years, and it was really a very bad building. It was 6 or 8 different levels. It was just cut up. It was poorly designed from the origin of it, and the preservationists in Harrisburg, there was one particular individual that positively tried to to force the salvaging of the building. And unfortunately, he did not, or fortunately, he did not maintain it. The building was torn down, and it was, for a couple of people, it was very unfortunate for them. But after we put a building, we had a Pennsylvania Manufacturing came to us from Philadelphia and wanted a traditional building with contemporary overtones. And we built the building, and after it was finished, we got many comments from people. They just thought it was wonderful how we restored and salvaged and preserved a building. They didn't even remember what it was or what it became. But we've done 17 buildings for PMA since that. So most of our work is repetitive work. So we must be doing something right.
I would say so. I'll look at that. I'm a member of Pine Street Presbyterian Church, so that's very close to what I see on Sundays.
I think we have some things in here. I just wanted to bring something
Yes.
along
Oh, good.
to let you. I didn't know how much or how familiar you were with what we had done at the library. I mean,
There's a
how
library,
often do you
yes.
get a photograph like that?
We're going to need to put it.
Okay. And there's the stairs. You can see where they are. Very fitting.
But this is our old website. This is the black glass building I'm talking about. It was a cardiovascular
Yes, oh, I did
surgeon.
see that. Mhm.
Cardiovascular surgeon's office. Well, this is part of the PMA building.
This is the building he was just talking about on State Street.
Yes, and that's the entry entry to it.
Do you have a picture of your first one, the 40,000 or
The 25,000.
25,000?
Yes.
I would think you would be very proud to
It
have your
was-
first commission.
Well, actually, the first commission I had was prior to that. We built a home that became my architectural thesis
Oh,
in 1960. And it should be here. That's the original house.
oh. Now, how much would it cost to do that today? A bit more than 25,000, I would think.
Yes, the one that, the
Times
house
5
that
or-
we did, 10
Mm.
easily. We did, I did want to show you the first one we did. But this home was done in 1960. And it's a
Oh,
very,
this was on the website too.
and it was an
Lovely.
interesting.
Is that in Camp Hill or?
No, that's out on off of Linglestown Road, Colonial
Oh, that's right.
Park. But when Margie and I were married in 1959, this physician gave us our blood tests, and it was one of those, "What do you do?" And about 4 months later, when we were in State College, I got a 10-page program from this doctor, and he wanted to know, would you be interested in doing a house for us? They had 8 children. This house is about 8,000, 9,000 square feet. It was $19 a square foot. Now it would be $300 or $350 a square foot. So it's changed a lot. But this is 55 years old now. And I think
And
it
holding up
qualified.
well.
I
The
think it-
roof is not leaking like the
Oh,
Frank
yes.
Lloyd Wright.
Oh, that's another thing. The only thing people know about Frank Lloyd Wright is the fact that he was involved with many women
Yes.
and his roofs leaked, which is unfortunate. But
That's lovely in that setting.
but I don't know. This was a photograph of the basement. That's what the library basement was. And this is what it became. That's the children's.
Now, what do you do when you run into these massive beams? Do you hold on to those for?
Yes, that's all original, except there were a couple of steel beams that were placed in it, in the basement area that we replaced, and one or two up in the upper floor that we replaced, and went back to replicate the wood beams and columns and capitals that were existing. But here,
And what are you finding now
That's-
today about materials? Oh, it was
that's the front of
this is the
PMA
manufacturer's
PMA building,
yeah.
yes.
in Harrisburg. Is it harder, more difficult to get quality materials to use now from the states, or I mean, do you have to? Is it cost prohibitive for a lot of these things, or?
Not really. Again, there are so many materials available. I mean, we do like to work with masonry, wood, and glass in residential work, and yet with the maintenance that is involved now. Our first house was redwood and concrete masonry units, which most people relegate to warehousing or basements. But the current house we're in is a all brick aluminum commercial windows. It's brick and glass, and that's it. I don't like 40-foot ladders anymore. But I'll try to find something here for you.
Now, were your parents alive to see your success in
Some
your
of it,
field?
yes. So, might be in the other one. Again,
And what sort of painting does your brother do? Does he do nature painting?
he's
or also?
a realist, yes. And my painting is a little different than his. When he was in Montana, when Lewis and Clark was at 2004, there was a businessman that commissioned him to do 15 paintings of all their camping sites in Montana.
Wow.
And I mean, he can replicate anything and everything that anyone would ask of him. I mean, he is very talented.
Do you enjoy painting at all for
I
pastime?
did when I was in school, but I just haven't had the time. I would like to go back to painting, and I would prefer sculpture. Three-dimensional aspects are more interesting to me, I think.
Well, that goes hand in hand with
painting.
the way you think.
Yes, it does.
Well, I'm going to leave architecture for a minute and go back to Camp Hill in the 50s. And what are your memories of what you did for fun, like going for an ice cream or roller skating or first car or any of those things?
Well, I went for ice cream at Rakestraws like everyone else when we lived in Camp Hill.
I think of that as in Mechanicsburg.
Yes, it is. That was a
So you
Sunday
had to go
bike hike.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Other things.
So what kind of a route would you use to do that? Of course, there wouldn't have been as much traffic. You
No, there
wouldn't have
wasn't
had to
any
cross-
traffic.
Mhm.
It's changed considerably. Well, Trindle Road, and I mean we traveled Trindle Road from Camp Hill. But yes, we hunted and fished, and now that's frowned upon
Well, not by everyone.
by most.
By many.
Swimming, we went to Boiling Springs swimming pool when we were
Oh.
in the 50s.
But now you didn't bike
and
out
we'd
there.
bike, yes.
You did? Wow.
That's only a couple of miles.
Seems like farther than that.
But now everyone's involved with electronic gadgets, which I quite frankly offend me in many ways. And also the resulting architecture that comes out of computers. You know, it's there's just a cliche that is used too frequently, that it's garbage in and garbage out of the computers. People think that they can go get a 1995 software package and design their dream house for them. Well, unfortunately, it's a lack of understanding that it's a lot more involved than that if you really want to end up with a result that's worthwhile.
Well, how about the library? Were you a user of the library as a child? Were you a reader?
Not as much as my wife and children. I was more involved with other things.
Yeah. But did your wife grow up in this area too? or
Yes,
was she-
Camp Hill,
Oh.
both of us.
Did you knew each other in school then? Or
Yes, we
Could
did.
have.
Actually, when I was in 7th grade, 8th grade, she was in 7th grade, we had our first date. And her father came and picked her up at 10 o'clock and took her home and left me sit on the curb. I didn't ask her for another date for 10 or 15 years.
so you didn't take her to the prom then?
No.
And I think it's my understanding. Did you go to Penn State?
Yes.
Okay.
You know, Margie and I was there for 3 of the first 4 years, and then we were married, and I stayed 5 more. I have a degree in fine arts, a bachelor's degree in fine arts, and a bachelor's degree in architecture. So I spent 9 years in school, and I wanted to get a master's, and Margie thought it was time that I go to work.
Well, you did a lot of reading. It might not have been library.
I do,
Fun
obviously.
reading, but it
well,
was-
no, it is. I mean,
Yeah.
there's an awful
Student
lot.
reading.
If you'd see, I have 1,500 books on art, architecture, landscaping. I mean, there's endless volumes in our household. We have 3 buildings there's more bookshelves than most. So no, obviously you're involved with books, and Margie doesn't like reading out of a Kindle or although she does have one of these small,
Tablet.
yes, I forget whose it is. Should remember, but I don't.
That's all right. We don't need to give them a placement advertisement. Well, how about Agnes? Do you have any Agnes stories from the flooding, or were you affected in that in any way? Your business?
We've done well. Agnes resulted in a small restaurant in Shipoke on Ray Street. I don't know if you ever knew of Au Jour Le Jour.
I've heard
How
of
long
it.
have you
I've
been
heard of
here?
it.
Well, this was a client that we did 3 houses for and a restaurant. He bought a restaurant or a flooded building in Shipoke, I think, for $4,000 and put a 32 or 35 seat restaurant in it, and it was a very nice restaurant, and it was there for
apparently it was.
quite a while. It was 20 years
Mhm.
Bob had it. It was very successful. I don't have, were you here when Empire, the restaurant here in Carlisle,
No.
was here? How long have you been here?
Since '82, but I don't remember that. I was not in it.
Well, in Empire, we did gutted that building on Hanover Street, right beyond the Market Pub, is it?
Oh, okay.
There's a Japanese
Oh, I do know,
restaurant there
yes.
now. Well, we did that restaurant originally,
Okay.
and that was done. That wasn't flooded, but we've been involved with a number of buildings that were flooded. But our own house. We did a second house in Mechanicsburg that was done between 68 and 72. We had just torn the front off of the building when Agnes occurred, and it was like Niagara Falls for a while. But yes, you deal with those things, and they do happen sometimes. But nothing else that I can think of significantly. But I went over a list of over 500 projects that we've done, and I really am upset about the fact that there's probably 20 of them that I don't remember what we did for the client.
Oh.
And I don't know if it's age or...
Faulty
But
documentation.
no, it wasn't. Actually, there's only 3 of us now. The office had between 5 and 10 people for 40 years. And we're slowing down, but I don't intend to retire at all. But there's 3 of us now, and Gary, he didn't remember some of them as well. I mean, and we have a client that's going to come, I guess in a week or 2, that I did work for their parents, and I have a good idea of what it was, but it was one of the names that didn't ring a bell. But
Now you can find out.
yes, I can. The children moved into it, and now they want to build a new house. So that's on the horizon.
Well, how about all the energy saving aspects and water saving and all these things? Do you find they're easy to work with, or they make things complex?
They are. Well, everything's becoming more complex. I mean, the township requirements. People also, they want you to reduce your fee because there's a recession and numerous reasons to do so, but yet there's twice as much involvement as far as township requirements and code requirements. I mean, in my mind, it's unfortunate that this sometimes gets to be as difficult as it is. But the energy saving, I mean, we've been using 6-inch studs and 6 inches of wall insulation and insulated glass for 40 years. I mean, I think that our projects were certainly efficient, but I haven't. And we've done a number of homes that have solar collectors, passive means, but our studio has no windows in the north side. I mean, that in itself is. And all the makeup heat that we get from the south side, which has a lot of glass in it, is beneficial, and we certainly have been practicing conservation, and there are some good things about it. A lot of the collectors, the solar collectors, were difficult. I mean, the maintenance of them, and they'd freeze, and we had clients who would go to Florida, and there wasn't water circulating properly through them, or something would happen, and it was a high maintenance. It still is, and the justification of some of the things. I think the advertisements that you see that there's buildings that are being built that are zero energy consuming is a stretch. It's a stretch, but we also we've been specifying local materials that we can. And now, of course, they bring up the thought of you save gasoline and trucking and shipping and transportation. I mean, we've been doing it for 40 plus years.
Well, what do you see as when I think about, one of the things I like about Carlisle is when you're stopped at a stoplight, you're always seeing interesting architecture almost any corner that you're on. But what do you think of the long-term life of some of these places? I mean, that they've lasted 200 years or 250 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I hope that sometime somebody in the preservation people would fight to save one of our buildings. I mean, we don't build. I had a classmate that is and has been very successful that I went through school with, and he's practiced all over the United States, won numerous awards, and his buildings, as far as he's concerned, should be torn down in 20 years, and I have a difficulty accepting that, but they were built to be 20 to 30 years,
I
and
wasn't
it's like,
I wasn't particularly thinking of your buildings, but I was thinking of the older ones, the stone ones and the brick ones that have been around. Surely they'll be.
well,
What's the life limit of one of those buildings?
I had an architect that worked with us for 13 years from Sweden, and he sort of scoffed at the fact that we were impressed with a 200-year-old building because their buildings are 800 years old, made out of wood and stone, and it's a matter of maintenance and taking care of them, and if they're architecturally of value, and obviously it's a reflection of the culture. Maybe some of them should be torn down in 20 years, but I have great respect for buildings such as the library. And it was interesting, when you think about all the massive stone on that building, when we decided that we were going to try to excavate under it, I couldn't believe it, but the stonework went down 3 feet below the basement floor. And it could have been much more involved. It seemed like we could just continue digging, and the stone was there. We cleaned it up, and of course it was furred out and insulated. But in other times we've been working on buildings, old buildings, that the foundation, there weren't any foundations. They dig 12 inches down and start laying stone. But we've done a number of farmhouses, renovations, and actually we built new farmhouses according to a couple of clients. And one of them is here between Carlisle and Newville. That we did a very traditional brick farmhouse, standing seam tin roof and chimneys, and which I think it's a matter of whether it's done with integrity and whether or not the buildings you're referring to, the older buildings, there are some incredible buildings. I don't know if you've ever been in the Appalachian Brewery on Cameron Street. Mm-hmm. The wood structure on that is positively unbelievable. It's all heavy timber. It looks like there isn't a knot in the wood, and it's I think 180, 200 years old, and it's on Cameron Street, and they've gutted it and exposed the wood framing, and it's of course the exterior walls are heavy masonry. The library walls are 1.5 to 2 feet thick. And they can last for 800 years if somebody maintains them. So I think we should save them.
Well,
and there's
I think a lot of people desire that. So
yes, which I have.
Is good.
It certainly is something that's worthwhile. But again, I wish that people would maybe approach somebody with an open mind about demanding that something be salvaged, which I'm thinking about the PMA building. This particular person to me was totally out of line. He just positively refused to want to let anybody do anything. And the building actually had stucco put over the original brick, and the way they fastened the stucco, it was so pockmarked. When we took the stucco off, which was deteriorating, and the building really in our minds, should not have been saved. And it even got to a point where we got a demolition permit from the city of Harrisburg, and apparently this fellow thought that wasn't good enough, and he went to the courts, and I think it was Judge Caldwell filed a restraining order on it to save it, and the demolition fellow came out on a weekend and destroyed it. And the judge's clerk came back. He didn't have anything to tack the restraining order onto the building. And I know some people were offended, but now they're very happy because the PMA bought the next 2 buildings and we restored those for them. So now they're
The
happy
happy
about
ending.
it. They are, but it was
Painful.
It's amazing sometimes how incensed people can become about some particular priority in their mind.
Are you familiar with the old pictures of the old market house on the square here in Carlisle? That was.
No,
Had
I
you ever
should
seen those
be.
pictures?
No.
Covered almost a whole block where the new courthouse is, and I think it was torn down in the 50s, mid-50s, and there was a big controversy about whether it should be saved or not, and they. I think the county wanted the space to put the courthouse up, and so the building was taken. But I have thought that that probably would not happen in today's environment. I don't know.
Well, sometimes it will and sometimes it won't. It's amazing how.
Well, they said it was all flimsy and bad and everything else, and it took them, 3 days to make the first knock out of the wall or something. It was very sturdy.
Yeah. Well, that was I was, of course, familiar with the market in Harrisburg.
Mhm.
I mean, that I was aware of. But then I remember when they tore the Sears Roebuck building down right on the square in Harrisburg, and it was a reinforced concrete building, and of course it was 10 times the effort that they ever thought of. They didn't do their research, and they tore it down. They tore down the Senate Hotel, the State Theater. I mean, there's numerous buildings that should not have been torn down.
When you were growing up in Camp Hill, was there much, did you go often into Harrisburg or not? Was your life pretty much on this side of the river?
All the time we went into Harrisburg. We could pick up enough Coke bottles from Camp Hill to Harrisburg to go to a movie. That was our Saturday.
And
We'd go
how
to the
did you
Saturday
go?
matinee.
Was the train still available, or did you bike into Harrisburg too, across the bridge? or-
We biked and walked. A lot of us would walk because we were collecting Coke bottles and cashing them in at the last source. But you ask, I mean, one of the questions I always ask is how many times do you get in the car, or how many times when you're in the car do you really see a building that you can get excited about? And unfortunately, Carlisle has a number, Mechanicsburg less.
Shiremanstown, fewer.
Yes. York and Lancaster have some nice areas, but I think it's unfortunate, and especially there are a few people that go looking for contemporary buildings. I know there are some, there's a lot of people that sort of want to keep posted on what we're doing, or where are you now and what can I look at. There are a few out there that will, but I think it's unfortunate if you don't have a quality of buildings that people will spend time. I mean, our present house is brick, and every hour it's different. People think Monet's paintings are interesting, and he may have painted the same thing 100 times over. Every hour on the hour he would repaint, and that's exactly what stonework, brick, sun, light, shadows. It's and the reflective qualities of glass can be unbelievable.
Yeah.
So it really is an enriching area that I wish somehow we could convey more of this to people to
Yeah,
appreciate and enjoy it.
your passion comes through. And I think we're about ready to wrap up here. And in closing, since you have this interest, I wondered if you would at some time consider doing a program here on the architecture of Cumberland County.
I ramble a lot.
That's all right. Well, you'd be limited to time.
No, I know it's not the time. It's fragmented.
But I mean, that would be a way of a teaching thing that you could do. If,
Yes, I certainly would be interested, but I haven't made a habit of it because people, unfortunately, a lot of people are disinterested in architecture as such, and especially contemporary architecture.
Well, I think we could conceive of some sort of a program where there's this aspect to Cumberland County's architectural history, and this is the architectural, a new step in our history,
Mhm.
and maybe combine it with,
I'd be
Old and
interested,
new.
but
it could be a good
yeah,
program.
yes, I think so too.
It
But
could
as
be a
I
book.
said, pardon.
It could be a book.
Well, actually, and I should remember that there was a young man at the Dauphin County Historical Society that just wrote a book,
Oh,
Architecture from
Right.
till 1942. Well,
Right.
I went to work for Laurie and Green because of George Pauly, who was the designer for Laurie and Green. How do you feel about the new courthouse in Carlisle?
well, I'm neutral about it. I mean,
I'm neutral. the George Pauly did the Dauphin County Courthouse, which to me is one of the best buildings in the city of Harrisburg. The Capitol building's okay, but I prefer the Duomo in Florence. The dome on the Duomo in Florence is much
The
more
real deal.
elegant and it's an incredibly beautiful piece of work. The Capitol is okay. It's a takeoff from St. Peter's, and I don't mean that. Well, Teddy Roosevelt was here in 1904 and thought it was the most beautiful building he had ever seen. Well,
he's a politician.
yes.
Well, it's clear that you have a passion for what you're doing and how it can enrich people's lives, and you're a product of Cumberland County.
Yes.
All
Everybody, there are many people ask, where did this come from? I don't know where it came from. My parents were traditionally inclined. Margie's parents were traditionally inclined. But whatever it was, when I was 12 years old and saw this flat-roofed house, simple, pristine, I thought this is better to me than what I've been seeing.
But you saw it in Cumberland County.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for your time and sharing.
Well, thank you for...
And if you think of things that you think you wish you had told us, please give us a call, and we'll give you another opportunity.
And I'd probably be redundant in many ways. But thank you
Okay,
very
yeah.
much.